The Old Testament literally means the Old Covenant. Though it may sound a singular covenant, in reality there are several covenants within the Old Testament. Let's take a look what they are. First, there is the covenant that God gave to Adam. God said that an offspring of the woman will come and crush the head of the serpent. This is a covenant. The second one is the rainbow covenant that God gave to Noah. God said to Noah that he will not judge the mankind with flood again. The flood we see nowadays isn't God's judgment. People just did not take the correct preventive action against the flood. That's it. The third one is the covenant that God gave to Abraham. God said to Abraham that Abraham's offspring will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and that many people will be blessed via the seed of Abraham. This is the covenant that God gave to Abraham. It's in the Old Testament. The fourth one is the covenant that was established with Moses as he acted as the mediator. Leviticus that we discussed earlier as the covenant. It is the covenant that God made with Levi, and it is the covenant that represents the Old Testament. If the people of Israel keep the covenant, they will become the possession of God, become the priest nation, and become the holy people of God. In turn, they will be blessed. This is the covenant God made with Levi said. The fifth one is a covenant that also is a promise, and it is the one that says the Messiah will come out of the house of Jesse and the offspring of David will save us. This covenant was delivered by the prophet Isaiah. The sixth one is the covenant that says when the time comes, the new covenant will be established in place of the old covenant. This one was revealed through the prophet Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah, chapter 31-31 says that God will make a new covenant. This is also a covenant. The seventh covenant is the one says that the people of Israel will be scattered across the lands, and in due time they will return to their homeland, the land of Canaan. This covenant was clearly prophesied by the prophet Amos and Ezekiel. This one was already fulfilled. Almost all of these covenants were fulfilled. The history validates the fulfillment of these covenants as clearly as a photo. Also among the old covenants, there are ones that prophesies not just the first coming of Jesus, but the second coming as well. In total, there are 7 big covenants when we look inside of the Old Testament. Typically speaking, though, Leviticus is the prime representative of all covenants. In other words, the covenant that was established at the Mount Sinai is the biggest covenant of all. This covenant is referred to as the covenant of Mount Sinai, the covenant which Moses acted as the mediator between the people of Israel and God. I've already said it multiple times that the book of Leviticus is the core of the Old Testament and the center of the Pentateuch. Although the Pentateuch begins with the book of Genesis, we don't generally call the Pentateuch the book of creation. We call it Torah, or the book of the law. The book of Leviticus is at the center of it, so it is called Torah, the book of the law. We do not know exactly when the Pentateuch was written by the Hebrews, but if Moses was the author, then we can estimate that between 1440 BC and 1400 BC Moses wrote the 5 books. Since then, and even though it's been more than 3,400 years that these books were written, there has not been another set of documents as grand and magnificent as these books since, ever. There is no other book like the Bible that was written 3,400 years ago that is just as ethical, grand, honest, faithful, and even as we read it now the truth within it remains unchanging. Now as we are about to dive into the book of Genesis, if I were to add just a little more to what I've said about the book of Genesis before, this book is the most important book in the Bible, out of all 66 books in the Bible. The books of Gospel are important and the Romans is important, too. But the forefather of faith Abraham was acknowledged before God as righteous and faithful, and he did not have the books of Gospel and the Romans. The very example of faith that Romans talks about is none other than Abraham himself and his faith. If you believe like Abraham, obey like Isaac, and be honest and truthful like Joseph, then you do not need the Romans. You can enter into a right relationship with God without the Romans. The book of Genesis shows the origin of everything except for the origin of God. When we discuss or talk about an important topic, Its base, its origin, its source, its originality and its intention cannot be found from no other place like the Bible. Only the Bible tells us of these things. Only in the Bible can we find things like the origin of space, life, man, sin, culture and religion, and more. Every origin can be found inside of the Bible, except that of God. The clear advantage that the Christianity has over other religions is that we have the book of Genesis. We also have the path to the salvation and the eternal life. And we have the doctrine of the resurrection, the end of history, and the doctrine of the afterlife. We have it all. This is the Christianity. No other religion can bring forth their reasons for any one of these important topics. The book of Genesis enables man to have the correct view on the world and the history. And if you say you believe in the book of Genesis, you then cannot really say we are strangers to one another. Why? We are the descendants of one grandfather, right? If you believe in the book of Genesis, then we are all descendants of Noah. Everyone that was not related to Noah had perished in the flood, right? So we are all brothers and sisters and there is no stranger, in fact. If you're making strangers out of your neighbors, are building walls around you, and form a party or a group to dispute with others, all that is the devil's doing. It is what the God of this world wants you to do and you should not follow such a scheme. As we believe in the book of Genesis, it is not a right thing to make enemies with people. If anyone believes that God Almighty has created all things in heavens and earth, including man, then every creation is God's product, right? Therefore no one should be handling anything and anyone carelessly. Just as no one dares to handle masterpieces of Da Vinci or Michelangelo carelessly, who are we to treat God's masterpiece carelessly? How dare we? Even when we're talking about environment issues, we ought to consider the fact that all is God's creation. Anything that has life needs to be treated with care and regards. It doesn't matter the size, or where it lives, or what it looks like. Ants, earthworms, or some single-celled organism, no matter what it is, it should be treated with care. Why? Because it is all God's creation. Here is a question for you. Is our God the one who will do unnecessary things, or not? He is not the one to do any unnecessary things, right? He is not some mindless God and that is why he did not create things that weren't needed in this world. You believe it, too, yes. Then, everything exists on the lands has worth and has a reason for existing. Flies, mosquitoes, roaches, earthworms, and ants, they all have reasons to exist, according to my researches. They are all needed. Like many countries in the past, South Korea also had kings once, and if you look at their ages, they generally did not live a long life. There were maybe 2 kings that lived past their 50s. Most of them died in their 30s and 40s. Why did they live such a short life? They had no antibodies. They were born, grew up and lived in the king's palace and their bodies had no outside stimulant. Nothing ever happened to them and to their bodies, so they naturally had very little or no antibodies. Their bodies never had the opportunity to develop a strong immune system because there was no outside stimulant. Look at our children now and see if they are any different than the kings of old. How many of them grow up having outside stimulations? There is no mosquito bite, flea bite, and no parasite, nothing at all to give our children to develop a strong immune system. There is nothing happening both inside and outside. Then their immune system becomes weaker and weaker as they grow up. They weren't like that when they were first born, but as they grow up with a weak immune system, they become sick easily. So I tell people when they are raising children, they should move to places where there are tons of mosquitoes. And let the mosquitoes bite your children. Let them bite them and bite them again and let them bite every day, all day. Let them bite deep, small, big, over and over. Then your children will grow up strong and healthy, sickness-free. All those mosquito bites act as the immunization shot and help your children to develop the natural antibodies. They will have the strong immune system. So when you build a new house, build it in the area where there are many mosquitoes. I'm not kidding about this. It has been 30 years since I have stopped using any kind of bug sprays. I stopped using them after I learned the logic of the creation. When a mosquito comes at you, it doesn't just come and bite you, does it? It always lets you know beforehand. It makes that unique buzzing noise which basically tells you that the immunization shot is here and it doesn't hurt all that much. In fact, it hurts way less than the actual shot you get from your doctors. What's more important is that it is free. So here it comes, this tiny mosquito, risking its life just to make our bodies strong. That's its mission. It's working hard all night, taking risks, to fulfill its destiny, and we, in return, use the bug spray on it. We have been doing a savagery thing. I'm not joking here. We have tried and tried hard to avoid flies, mosquitoes, fleas, lice, and other parasites. We have finally succeeded in vanquishing every parasite within our bodies, and the result is the atopic dermatitis, or atopic eczema. This is about 1,000 times itchier than lice bites. Many of our children are suffering from this hideous disease. When we look at the 6th commandment from the 10 commandments, we normally understand it as, "You shall not murder," right? The original context is, "You shall not kill," and not, "You shall not murder." Of course, we are not to kill a fellow man. Here I am trying to tell you not to kill even a mosquito. Anything that has a life has the right to live, and has received a permission to live from God. They have received God's command to live. And it all has the purpose for existing, a worth, and a value. Believing it like this is having faith, the faith on creation. The creation in the book of Genesis does not include the detailed information on how God created each of his creation. Rather, it gives us a brief information on the creation. The Bible says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created." It excludes a lot of information and remains simple and straight to the point. The book of Genesis wasn't written scientifically, either, but theologically. If you do not fully understand this, then without realizing, you start trying to use the science to examine and validate the theology. It is a pointless thing to do. A person like Richard Dawkins is the very person who is doing the pointless arguing. This thing called the science belongs to the elementary education. The basic education is the math. The elementary education is the science. A little bit higher education is the philosophy, and the queen of the education is the theology. This is not coming from me, either. A popular theologian named Thomas Aquinas had said that the philosophy was the servant of religion. During his time, the philosophy was regarded as the highest form of education, and while he was studying the theology, he published his grand work called Summa Theologia. He studied both the philosophy and the theology and concluded that the philosophy was but the servant of the theology. The science is the elementary education and the math is one level below the science. The math is the base of all education, and the science one level up and is the elementary education. The philosophy is the higher form of the education, and the queen of all education is the theology. People will not want to acknowledge it, but it is the fact. So if you use the science as the measurement stick on the book of Genesis, you will not get any answer with it. The book of Genesis was written theologically, for the thing called the creation is before and beyond any science. The creation is God's science and not the science of man, at least. The creation is not measured by us, by the men's science, it is at the level of God's own science. Therefore, when we look at the world which God has created, we find it to be very physical, chemical, and sometimes very super-physical, super-chemical and super-ideal. That is not to say that it is unreasonable, but it is beyond reason and logic of the men. It is the whole new different level of science, if you will. It is the science that ascended the science itself, and this is what the book of Genesis has. There is also nobody who had witnessed God's creation when it had happened, no man had seen it. So a topic such as this needs to be approached after acknowledging the fact that the book of Genesis was written with theological words which were by the revelation of God. Otherwise, what people like Richard Dawkins are trying to do, judging the book of Genesis with the evolutionary biology, is wrong from the onset. How do they think that it makes sense to use the elementary level of the education to dare talk about the queen of the education, the world of the theology? The word such as creation isn't a scientific word, nor a philosophical word. It is not a word that can be found outside of the Bible. The word creation is. The Christianity of Europe and the theology of the Western world have either failed or neglected the work of witnessing and proving God the Creator. As a result, the atheism, the materialism, the evolution theories, and the communism came about. A French daily newspaper called Le Figaro once published an article which said that the total number of victims of the communism as it swept the world was 150 million, death alone. If death alone was this huge, then how much more for the injured, wounded, orphaned and widowed? Can you imagine how many people have suffered because of it? This is how the world paid dearly because those in Europe who were responsible for the Bible failed to bear witness to God the Creator. Same thing goes for today's pastors and the biblical scholars, and woe to them if they, too, fail to bear witness to God the Creator. People must acknowledge that there will be a bigger and more severe judgment for those who are in teaching position. Going back to the evolution theories, I have been studying and examining the evolution theories for nearly 30 years, and my conclusion on the evolution theories is that the evolution theories aren't just 90% false, but 100% false. There isn't any factual incident or evidence that proves the evolution, nor any experimental case which proves the evolution. That's why it remains a theory. It is always the evolution theory or theories, and it's not like we haven't given it time to work things out and prove it. We, in fact, have allowed it for over 100 years to prove itself in scientific ways, and it still hasn't proven itself to be a factual science. So it has well passed the probation period, I would say. It's time to throw the whole thing away. They are really the theories that have long been overdue to be discarded. The evolution theories that the old evolutionists have reported are being disputed and dismissed by the new evolutionists and the honest scientists. It is real, the evolutionists themselves are disputing the evolution theories. For example, people once thought that only one single organism came about and it happened only once, and many organisms came from that one single organism. This proved to be false in the genetic engineering, so the evolutionists gave up this idea. Now they say that different organisms came from their respective origins. So cows came from cows, and became small cows, big cows, cows with spots, cows without spots, black cows, and etc. And same thing goes for the pigs, dogs, and other animals. This is the idea that the evolutionists argue. What does the Bible say about all this? All different organisms were created by God, and that's that. It is as simple as that. The spontaneous generation was proven to be false by a scholar named Louis Pasteur. In his experiment, he put the broth in a swan neck flask and warmed up the flask, so that there is certain element of heat and moisture inside of the flask. Through this experiment he found that since no organism was produced inside of the flask without having anything coming from outside through the swan neck opening, the spontaneous generation was false. The spontaneous generation theory had been obsolete since Pasteur's experiment. So the evolutionists came up with a new theory called the biogenesis, but this was also proven to be not true because if you look at the fossils from each different fossil bed, one kind of fossils from one fossil bed is totally different from the other kind of fossils from the fossil bed one level above the previously mentioned fossil bed. There is no connection linking the two different fossils from one different fossil bed to another. This is also known as the missing link. This has shown us that one population had lived and died off, or if it survived, it would become stable throughout the time. This theory is called the punctuated equilibrium. This theory disputed the biogenesis theory. The evolutionists are scrapping one evolution theory and the next. Next came the mutation theory, but this one was denied by Mendel's law of inheritance. There are mutations in the nature. Yes, it does happen, but the chances of a mutation happening is 10,000 to 1. In other words, if you plant 10,000 peas, you will see 1 or 2 mutations out of 10,000 peas. Upon seeing this, though, some people thought that the evolution was possible and rushed to make their own claim. Like I said, there are mutations, but if you look at the result of the mutation, it is rather baffling. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the mutation always displays the negative effects. The mutation does not display an improved form, but rather goes in the opposite direction. And once it reaches a certain point, the mutation does not accumulate and create a different species, but it turns deadly for the affected species. A lethal factor kicks in and the species can no longer go on. This fact has been proven already, as a matter of fact. Mendel's law of inheritance has successfully demonstrated this fact, and it has demolished the evolution theory on the mutation. You see what happens when the elementary level of education is used to describe the world of the theology. The next one is a quite popular one, and we see it all too often in our school textbook, the Neanderthal. Its appearance consists of the hairy torso, the crooked neck that leans forward, and a wooden club on one hand. We see it in the school biology book, The Neanderthal. Its bones were discovered in Dusseldorf, Germany, and people thought first that the bones were from the 20,000 years ago, and second they belonged to the being who were close to the modern human. Then a closer look and examination were performed recently and found that the bones actually belonged to someone with the rickets, a sickness of the vitamin D deficiency. What it all tells is that just because something is in the school textbook, that doesn't mean that it is reliable and believable. Many things, in fact, are totally wrong and misleading. Trying to prove something which was false from its very origin, people keep making up lies after lies to cover up something like the evolution theories, but in the end, no matter how many layers of lies and deceit they put on, the honest and earnest examinations and tests revealed the truth, which in this case shows that the evolution theories were all lies. God did not create a monkey first and then made it evolve gradually over a long period of time to become a man. Then there is the matter of the ancient artifacts. Among many of the ancient artifacts, there are ones from this place called Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. Most of these are stone tools that have sharpened edges, and they are really simple tools. These things are believed to be the important information in understanding human evolution. Now if you get stranded on a remote island today and thus you are completely isolated from all the marvels of today's technologies and tools, what would you do to survive? Start making tools like the cavemen did, of course. In fact, there are still people in this world whose lifestyles are similar to that of the cavemen, even today as we speak. Just a little over 100 years ago there were carnivores in this world. Places like in Papua there lived these people who ate other human beings not so long ago. Some time ago I've heard of a story where the children of these carnivores lived on and actually went and visited the grandchildren of the missionary who was killed and eaten by the carnivores. They came because they wanted to apologize. They came to apologize for their grandparents killing and eating the missionary. What I am trying to tell you is that when the scientists were coming out with all these different theories and ideas, using the scientific terms and vocabularies that normal people would typically have a difficult time understanding, as well as manipulating both animal and human bone fossils however they saw fit and maneuvering to their advantages, lining them up in a way that will help their theories, they proclaimed the evolution as if it was the real science. Folks, the evolution is not a scientific fact. For something to be acknowledged and deemed to be a scientific fact, it must go through 4 steps and pass all 4 steps. First, it must be observed. Second, it must establish a comprehensive theory. Third, it must be experimented in a lab. And lastly, it must be proven with data. These 4 steps must universally be done and done in a way that multiple tests after tests must successfully yield the same result every time by anyone who performs the test or the experiment. Then, and only then, we can call it a scientific fact. The evolution was never observed. It just has the theory, in fact, more than one. It was never proven in a lab with any scientific experiment. So it cannot be tested in a lab, nor can it be proven in any way. The only thing it has is the theories surrounding the ideas. That's all there is, a bunch of theories. And it's really about time that people give them up. After that, there is only one logic available to us, and that is, our God Almighty has designed and created all things with His highest level of intelligence and intellect. And there is purpose in His creation. God didn't just create anything out of boredom. Behind it all there is God's purpose, plan, creation logic and law. Therefore, the evolution did not occur in the past, it doesn't occur in the present day, and it will not occur in the future. The law of genetics says the evolution cannot happen, and the laws of physics and chemistry all say the same thing, that the evolution cannot happen. Take your lip balm for an example. If you use it and keep using it to protect your lips from sunburn or windburn, it will get worn down and eventually you will have used it all. If you, however, do not use it and leave it in one place without touching it for about 10,000 years, its plastic covers will become disintegrated on its own and the balm itself will dry up and nothing will remain. Am I right or wrong here to think like this? What it tells us is that there is no substance in this world that will improve on its own over time, if left isolated and untouched. This is also known as the second law of thermodynamics. We all learned the laws of thermodynamics in high school. The first law of thermodynamics is the law of conservation. The second law of thermodynamics is about the state of entropy, which states that the entropy of any isolated system always increases. Nothing ever becomes newer. Instead, its entropy will increase, always. This is why I am telling you that physically, chemically, and genetically there is no path for evolution. This is why I say in conclusion that the evolution isn't just 90% lie, but 100% lie. From the beginning to the end, it will only remain as theories, ever. Let's get one or two things straight here. Even though it is this obvious that the evolution isn't true, when somebody from a corner of this world rises up like Richard Dawkins and claims that there is no God, then people rise up together in agreement and cheer him on. And in my point of view, there is nobody more foolish than someone who is an atheist. Why? Because a topic such as saying that God doesn't exist and trying to prove it logically is simply impossible. You just can't. Simply put, there is no way to prove that God doesn't exist. Some of you may not get this right now, but there is no way to prove it, period. If you ask why God doesn't exist, there simply is no evidence of God's non-existence. How can there be any evidence of something that doesn't exist? It may sound confusing, I know, but since there is no visible evidence, there cannot be any logic on it, either. There isn't even any atheism thesis available, yet. You can go around the world searching for the atheism thesis, and I already know that you don't have to, because there isn't any paper or document that both logically and reasonably proves God does not exist. Someone, though, came to the realization that using the word atheism was wrong after using the word so often and quickly changed to something new, the materialism. The materialism is all about something existing. Nothing else exists but the material, because the material is visible and it exists. Then what about the mind and the thought? What are they according to the materialism? The mind and the thought are like the secretion of a gallbladder, they are the secretion of brain. Soon only the material will prevail and remain, so there is only the material and nothing else matters. There is no spirit, no angel, no soul, no God, and nothing. This is what people believe in the materialism are claiming. If somebody can logically dispute and prove that God does not exist, then the word atheism can be established firmly. Like I said over and over again, though, there is nobody that can prove that God does not exist in this world, or in the heaven, or in the hell. Think about it. Can anyone travel every corner of this world and see if God can be found? What will they do if God moves around and if they miss him? Somebody could say they have traveled and checked every place in Japan and did not find God there. Well, what if God was in Alaska in the meantime? If someone really did travel every nation on the earth and did check every corner, but did not find God? What if God was in another planet? The non-existence of God just cannot be established logically, So if you have a bit of sense, you would know that you really cannot call yourself an atheist. If you're talking to someone about Jesus and they tell you that they are atheists, you show them your respect and ask them how they were able to write a paper on the atheism. If one is to become an atheist, he must be able to prove his belief in a logical sense and on a paper. That's how one becomes an atheist. In the world of logic, however, there is no such a thing as proving something which does not exist. Therefore, to say that God does not exist cannot be proven with a proof that God does not exist. The logic does not form. That's why no one has ever written any atheism thesis.